I tell you, Buxton, it was a place you wouldn't believe, because it sounds like a paradise.
Traditionally, mining towns were small and temporary. This led to whites being the predominant mining employees. Companies used black workers to break up union strikes, such as the case of the Consolidation Coal Company in Muchakinock, Iowa. However, when the company moved to Buxton, Iowa, people were allowed more freedom and autonomy. African Americans lived intermixed in the town, and the company built support facilities for the entire town, creating Buxton, a triumph in desegregation. However, when the mines closed, African American workers faced tragedy, moving from rural America to urban centers where they had to return to the world of hatred and pain. Segregation was a way of life in America during the early 1900s. Blacks and whites had everything separated, including stores, living communities, and churches. At the same time, almost everything ran on coal. Trains ran on coal, factories ran on coal, and homes ran on coal. Coal was king. Therefore, coal companies were industry kings. As companies moved west, so did the miners. This meant that mining towns were temporary. As coal was mined out, towns moved. Therefore, one company-owned store existed within the town. Workers paid the company store for supplies, home rental, and food. Starting in 1873, Ohio and Pennsylvania miners attempted striking. When the workers walked out, the companies brought in African Americans to fill the positions. When workers returned, African Americans were left out, were hired at lower wages and considered unskilled laborers. Additionally, the companies followed a sundown law. This law required all African Americans to leave town and the mines before sundown. The Consolidation Coal Company's first successful mining town was Muchakinock in 1875. Muchie was different from other mining towns. Typically, all businesses set within a mining town were owned by the coal company itself. The CCC allowed for independent businesses to be run in the community. In Muchie, the mining town had a minor labor dispute in 1880 over the low wages. This brought in the initial wave of African American laborers to the CCC. The African Americans' work ethics impressed the CCC. Instead of letting the African Americans go, they decided to let them stay. The CCC allowed for equal pay, regardless of race.
Mine work in Iowa presented an economic opportunity for poor black miners from the South.
This allowed for African Americans to escape the Jim Crow laws that were established in 1877. These laws enforced racial segregation in urban areas, and by 1887, African American workers were able to create a mutual protection society in Muchakinock. Members paid 50 cents a month or $1 per family for health insurance and burial expenses. Additionally, African Americans established institutions in Muchakinock that included a school and pharmacy. Additionally, the CCC allowed for African Americans to operate and own their own businesses. This made the miners and their families satisfied and prosperous. When the bituminous coal miners' strike of 1894 occurred, all Iowa coal miners went on strike except for Muchakinock miners. On May 30th, 1894, 400 to 600 miners set upon Muchakinock and nearby mines to try and force them to join the strikes, leading to the National Guard arriving to protect Muchakinock miners from strikers. By 1900, Muchakinock hit its peak population with an estimated 2,500 citizens. However, like other mining towns, Muchakinock was forced to disband. By 1904, the Muchakinock mines were overmined and many families migrated to Buxton. From the start, Buxton was bound to be a unique mining town. Buxton was a planned town. The town had an orderly layout, including 2 YMCAs, a business district, and churches.
In Buxton, you had people living in, 1.5-story homes on a quarter-acre lot, and it was a planned, the communities were planned. You had a big company store where people were not forced to buy from the company store, which was very different from mining towns. Plus, it was a big company store where you had designer from, Chicago and such doing window displays, and you had people from outside the community coming in. You had a huge YMCA, there at Buxton, which not only did you have it Well, not only was it used by both races, when the company first built it, they built it for African Americans, and African Americans managed it.
A high school. At this school, there were black and white teachers, and there were black and white students.
First grade teacher was named Mrs. Billingsley. She couldn't have been prejudiced against the whites, and the white teachers weren't prejudiced against the blacks. They treated us all as one.
Working tensions were lessened due to everyone working for the company as well as the town itself. Moreover, Buxton allowed for African Americans to live within the city limits.
I never in my life lived in a house where there wasn't a musical instrument, where there were not newspapers, where there were not books. I never lived in a house that was uncomforted. That was our lifestyle, and I wasn't alone. All of the youngsters that I played with, we all lived the same way.
There was no division on where individuals could live. Whites and blacks resided peacefully intermixed throughout the town. This close living situation allowed for interracial marriages.
Every afternoon, and this German lady, she would rock me every afternoon. I'll always remember that. I'll always remember her.
However, Buxton was a cold town, allowing itself to isolate from other communities. Buxton was developed as a united and equal town in a time of segregation, a black utopia triumph. Not even the Ku Klux Klan messed with Buxton residents, despite the KKK terrorizing nearby towns.
Buxton was certainly a triumph in peaceful and productive integration as far as the residential community and mining operations were concerned. The Ku Klux Klan demonstrated in nearby towns and created racial unrest, but they did not have the courage to march in Buxton.
At its peak in 1910, there was a population between 8 and 10,000, with over 50% of Buxton's population being African Americans. Buxton was prosperous throughout the town's existence. However, like all coal towns, Buxton became a ghost town in 1922. The mine shut down due to overmining and a decrease in coal consumption. The closing of Buxton had tragic consequence. Many African Americans believed that they had stepped back a century by leaving Buxton.
There was a white girl that lost her purse. She couldn't find her purse. I was the only black student in that class. And guess what? She told the consul, I just remember her name, that I had taken her purse. In fact, she found it later. But do you think she came and said, "I'm sorry"? Nothing at all.
Most of the residents were required to move from the rural area to urban areas. This caused a tragic impact as African American children who were unaware of segregation in Buxton were forced to move into segregated communities.
So I was going to lunch and I said, I think I'll try this plate. I went in there and ordered me orange juice and a sandwich. She gave me my orange juice in a paper container, and I was only black in there, and all the whites had a glass. So I says to her, "Why did you give me this drink in the paper?" She said, "Because that is what we do. We don't serve black folks with a glass." I said, "Thank you," gave it back to her and walked out.
This caused a tragic impact as African American adults were forced to take lower wages and harsh working conditions. Many women had to become house cleaners, while the men had to work needle construction jobs. In addition to working conditions, this impacted African Americans as they were no longer allowed to own their own businesses, to try clothing on in stores, or swim in the community pool. The Iowa State Bystander and other black newspapers pushed for tolerance and integration. Buxton, Iowa was very different from traditional mining towns, a true triumph in integration in a time of segregation. However, tragedy struck when the mines closed, tragically returning residents to the reality of segregation.
The long-term legacy of Buxton is that blacks, whites, and others can live, work, attend school, pray, engage in entertainment, all these things together in harmony.